Here I'm in Visual Studio. Today I'm going to do some practice with basic math in C. So I'm going to make a new project, Win32 console application. I'm going to call this Math Practice and navigate to the location where I want to put it. Click OK. Go into the application settings, make sure it's an empty project, click Finish. Go to Add New Item. Make sure it's a source code file, math practice.c. I can name the source code the same as my project file, or it can be different. And then I've gone ahead and I have a little skeleton here in my notepad, so I can paste that in here and I don't have to worry about having to type in the preprocessor directives and everything. So I'm just going to change the description of this, which is math practice. And the course is COP 2220. It's important that you always have a header in the top of your program that explains what's going on. So I've already gone ahead and defined a few variables here. I have a couple of integers, a couple of doubles, and I don't really need characters for math practice, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these characters, but I am going to have an integer to do the remainder and to calculate the result of integer division. So I'm just going to call it div. And I will have a double, which is also going to store the result of a quotient or division with doubles. So instead of using user input to get the results, since this is just an exercise on math, I'm just going to assign values to my variables. But if you want to go back and look at the printf scanf practice, you can check that video out and see how to do practice with getting input by the user. So, but here I'm just going to go ahead and put some values in here. These are doubles, so I'm going to assign them double values, and those are integers, so I'm going to assign them with integer values. So to do math, there are a few operations in math. We have the plus sign for adding. You have the minus sign for subtracting. You have a star or asterisk for multiplication. And you can divide, which is a forward slash, a backslash. And then you have remainder, which is a percent sign. So divide is a forward slash and remainder is a percent sign. Okay, so we have these different operations that you can do. And you can add, subtract, multiply, divide, and find the remainder. So I'm just going to do a few examples of this with these different variables I have up here. Something that you want to do when you're testing and you're trying things is you can put printfs to check to see what your results are. Another thing is that to remember is that when you're doing math in C, the answer goes on the left instead of on the right like you're used to with regular math. So if I wanted to calculate the quotient of AVG1 divided by AVG2, I just have to remember that the mathematical expression goes on the right, it gets calculated, and the result goes on the left. So then if I wanted to print that result onto the screen, I could use printf with a placeholder and print it onto the screen. And when I try something in C, I should always test to make sure I haven't made any mistakes. So what happens is it's going to take AVG1, divide it by AVG2, calculate that quotient, store it in the variable quo right here, and then that's what I'm printing onto the screen. If I wanted to do it backwards, I could do AVG2 divided by AVG1, or I could also get input from the user to get these values. All right, the next thing I'm going to do is show you a little bit about integer division. So I have two variables, one is remainder and one is div. So with div, I'm going to calculate the result of integer division, which I would take num1 and divide it by num2. And now the result of integer division, what it does is it does not, since it's integers, it's just going to divide the 7 into the 10 and give the result of how many times the 7 goes into the 10. So the answer should be 1. It doesn't matter if there's any left over because in integer division, in integers, you're dealing with whole numbers. But then there's an operation which is remainder, which can calculate and give the remainder. So I can use the modulus operator to get the remainder between num1 and num2, which in this case should be a 3 because 7 goes into 10 one time with 3 left over. So we could do the calculations and then print these results onto the screen. So I could print here result of integer division is %d, and remainder is %d, and I have two placeholders, so I put two variables in there, which would be this div, and the second one is rem. Okay, so now the only thing I think I'm going to want to make sure is I format this correctly, and we will test it and see what we get. All right, so the result of integer division is 1 and the remainder is 3. Just like I said, if you take 10 and you divide it by 7, 7 goes in there one time and the remainder would be 3. So the main thing to remember when you're dealing with math in C is that you can add, subtract, multiply, divide, and use remainder. And if you have longer mathematical equations, you can always use parentheses to make sure for order of operation. But in C, multiplication and division does go before subtraction and addition. And this is just a little bit about how integer division works and the remainder modulus operator works, and remember that the answer is on the left. That you're doing it in the form of an assignment statement. So you're taking a variable and you are assigning the mathematical expression on the right to that variable on the left. And mathematical expressions can include variables and numbers. So I could say I want to calculate into a variable num2, which would just replace what was already there, equals num1 plus 3 minus 7 times 4. Now in this situation, what it would do is it should multiply 7 times 4 and then do that first and then take num1, add 3 to it, and subtract the result of that. So let's go ahead and print what that is onto the screen and see what happens. Result is %d, and the variable is num2. And let's test it and see what happens. So you can see it's a negative number because what happened is, because of order of precedence, it multiplied this first and then subtracted from that result. Now if you wanted it to do something different, like you wanted it to do this first and then multiply it by 4, you just add parentheses. And now the result is 24 because it did this math part first and then multiplied it by 4. So you can try all different kinds of ways in which to, if you're ever in doubt, you just put parentheses to make sure that you're going to be combining properly, and make sure that your mathematical expressions are very clear using these different operations.